It's the black guy in the corner, but they'd rather see a on the corner. They say I'm stealing Nick's clips like I'm stealing Nick's chick, not knowing that I hit him first week for the lick. I said, Nick, I could post here while you post there. Let's run the ads up, then let's meet up over there.
Good evening, everybody. You're watching America First. My name is Nicolás J. Fuentes. We have a great show for you tonight. It's not going to be the best show ever. It's kind of a slow day, I'm going to be honest with you. Boring day. Boring, slow day. But we still have a great show. It's great to be back here with you tonight on Friday, Casual Friday. I'm wearing my hoodie. And our featured story tonight, we're going to be talking all about the brand new Qatari Air Force base in the United States of America. Okay, so what's up with that? I don't know, like, maybe the Jews are right on this one. Like, what's going on with that? You see this? So our featured story is that the Trump administration, he's actually completing a previous deal that was started under the Biden administration, but they're going to open up an Air Force facility for the Qatari Air Force in Idaho. And it's not, strictly speaking, going to be a Qatari base. It's our base. It's an existing U.S. base, but it's a Qatari facility that they will own and they'll pay for inside of the base. And they're going to send their pilots and their Air Force personnel to train here to fly their airplanes. I guess they can't do it over there because of airspace restrictions. Not the biggest fan, I'm not going to lie. And it's kind of been one thing after another with them. And I don't know how hard I want to go because, of course, whenever you talk about Israel, it's like this is their new line. Their new go-to line is to say, well, what about Qatar? What about all the Qatari money and education? What about everything having to do with Qatar? They say Tucker Carlson is a Qatari agent. But it's getting to be a little bit much. You know, first they give Trump an airplane, which raises some eyebrows. Then they actually get a security guarantee from the United States. This was a couple of weeks ago, after Israel bombed Qatar on September 9th. The Trump administration forced Israel to apologize and then actually gave Qatar a NATO-like security guarantee, which is, I don't like that, not a fan. And now the latest is they're going to be deploying their Air Force on our soil to fly their planes. Okay, not a fan. So we'll talk all about it. Not good. I don't like that. And the Israelis, like Laura Loomer, the Israeli spy, you know, she sort of has a point. The irony, though, is she will never say that about Israel, but I'll say it about anybody. I'm America first. I'm not just anti-Israel. I'm America first when it comes to all of them. And by the way, this is perhaps a good moment to remind people that Israel, although they are the largest foreign influence in America, they're not the only. There's a lot of foreign influence in America. They're the biggest, the most problematic, the most influential, the most troublesome by far. It's not even close. There's not even a close number two. But it doesn't mean that there's not other stuff going on, and I don't like that either. I don't want Saudi Arabia here. I don't want Turkey here. I don't want Russia, China. I don't want Qatar. I don't want any of that in the United States. The only thing I'd be open to is maybe Europe. That's it. Not even that, but that'd be the only one. Maybe it's close. But we'll talk all about that. That'll be our main story. We're also going to talk tonight about Venezuela. It looks like regime change is imminent. And there was a very interesting piece in the New York Times, which we'll be going over tonight. And there's some conflicting reporting on this. But there are some reports that say that, of course, there is this gathering storm in the Caribbean. The United States is increasing its force posture on the coast of Venezuela. They're putting a lot of military vessels, Air Force, military personnel. They're putting them off the coast of Venezuela, looking at Grenada and some of the other Caribbean islands. There's been a lot of posts on social media, videos showing U.S. Air Force and U.S. Navy en route to Venezuela. And of course, this is happening at the same time that the United States is bombing Venezuelan, allegedly, drug cartel smuggling boats off the coast. There's been a lot of talk that the United States is going to start bombing Venezuelan soil. And there seems to be a anxiety within Venezuela that an invasion is imminent, that an actual intervention, not just this Nicky Knack stuff, they bomb a couple of small vessels. They're actually going to invade the country to depose its leader. In the midst of all this talk, there's a report from the New York Times that says that the Maduro regime in Venezuela has actually offered the United States a deal. And I haven't seen anybody else reporting on this. This should be a huge deal. This is major news. People don't realize we are on the cusp of war, and we're picking up right where we left off from 2021. This was John Bolton and the Trump administration's foreign policy in the first term. We're picking up on that. We picked up on that very quickly, and rapidly we're escalating tension in the region. But there apparently is a deal on the table being negotiated by Rick Grenell and some of the high-level personnel in the Maduro regime, and the deal goes something like this. Venezuela wants to give us all their oil, all their gold, all future oil. They want to shut down all their infrastructure projects in cooperation with Russia and China and Iran, and basically realign Caracas, their country, with the United States, which sounds like a great deal, because that is the problem. The problem is that the Western Hemisphere is the domain of the United States. This is the Monroe Doctrine for 200 years. And Venezuela, as a socialist country aligned with BRICS, aligned with the revisionist powers, so the argument goes, they have to be forced into compliance with the United States. They cannot be used as a base of operations or a point for China to project power in our hemisphere. Well, this sounds then like a perfect deal, because then we get Venezuela, we get their resources. They're very rich in resources, but then we don't have to go to war. And moreover, we don't have to worry about the chaos, the commitments that are involved in regime change. Well, guess who shut down the deal? It's Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio, our Secretary of State, he is allegedly the one in this administration that is pushing for, no, we actually need regime change. It's not enough that we get all their stuff. It's not enough that they align with Washington. Rubio says Maduro has to go. There has to be a bloody coup. There has to be a war. So what happened? I was told by national conservatives from the National Conservatism Conference, American Moment. I'm sure Kurt Mills, my number one op. Not really, very one-sided beef. He seems like a great guy. I really gave him such a hard time for basically no reason. I don't know why that was so irritating to me earlier this year. You probably don't even know who that is. I just had beef with him for a long time. Very one-sided, just kind of like A-logging him for not really a good reason. But in other words, if you have not been paying attention to the conversation, there have been so many people on the new right that insist that Marco Rubio got better in the past 10 years. Rubio is like just as bad of a neocon as Nikki Haley, always has been. And that's what he was known for. He was known for being a Tea Party traitor. He sold out the Tea Party in the Senate. Then he was known for being a neocon and being from Florida, being a pawn of the Israel lobby of Larry Ellison, of Miriam Adelson, Sheldon Adelson before he passed. And then in this NatCon world, there has been this perception, they're pushing this line that Rubio had an epiphany and now he's America first. Like, if you pay attention to this stuff, these circles in DC, they have insisted, no, Rubio got better. He's one of us now. He's totally solid. He changed his tune. I never trusted him for 1 second. And when Trump made him the Secretary of State, I said, that's a big problem. That's a huge problem. You might as well make Nikki Haley the Secretary of State. And people said, don't worry, it's not an issue. He's one of us. And whether it's the visas for the students that criticize Israel, whether it's Iran, whether it's Russia and China, now Venezuela, he seems to be no different than he was 10 years ago. He's a hawk. He's a foreign policy hawk. He is still a neocon. He just changed the rhetoric, just changed his tune. That's all. So we'll talk about that too. And it should be a pretty good show. Some new topics that we'll get into tonight. But like I said, very slow. That's why it took me so long to get the show together. I was looking for things to talk about. And, you know, there's these Chinese export controls on rare earths, which is sort of interesting, but there's not too much to say about that. And there's the ongoing government shutdown, these layoffs that are happening, but I don't find that to be terribly interesting. Seems sort of half-assed, probably will be reversed immediately. So it's been sort of slow. That's why it took me a minute. But we're going to have a good show regardless. Before we get into it, I want to remind you to smash the follow button on Rumble. Smash the like button, leave a comment, let me know what you think about the show. We have brand new products. You know what I am excited about? Brand new products. America First, trucker hats, Fuentes.store, made in America. So they're $40, which is outrageous. But, you know, if I made them in China, you would have a problem with that, right? If I made them in Asia, people would say, oh, this is America First, this is bullshit, they're made in China. Yeah, well, you make them in America, they cost $300 to make per thing. So anyway, Fuentes.store. They're very high quality, though. They're not made by little Asian hands. These are made by these are made by the hands of American whites, most likely Hispanics, probably. But Fuentes.store. We also have a brand new shirt. We're back in the apparel game. We're back making shirts. We have our Wang Half shirt. I don't have mine yet. I'm going to have it soon, but I posted the preview on Twitter. It says Wang Half, white ass going hard as fuck. Let everybody know that you mean business. When you go to college in your Wang Half shirt, everyone's going to know you're a white ass going hard as fuck. Don't fuck with me. You know, you have your Monster Zero Ultra. Don't speak. Now you may speak. Now you may speak. They're going to know not to be fucked with. White nigga. Make way. White ass nigga going hard as fuck coming through. Get out of the way. That's how you know. But check it out. Super high quality. Fuentes.store as well. Check out our subscriptions at americafirst.plus. People are always asking, what can I do for the movement? Give me money every month. AmericaFirst.plus. Be a plus member. Don't just leech. Do not be a parasite and watch the show for free. It's not free to do the show. It's close to being free. $15 a month, get access to the entire archive. $100 a month, you get access to a group chat with me, and I'm hanging out in there. I'm hanging out, talking with you people. I'm not always in a great mood, but, you know, you can talk to me. You can't guarantee that you're going to get a good response. You got to be kind of likable. You know, you're paying to talk to me in the group chat, and you're not paying for me to pretend to like you. Because I've had some problems with people in the group chat. I'm like, you know, I really don't like you very much. And I'll sit here and I'll listen to your nonsense because that's what you're paying me for, but you can't pay me to like you. Right? What is the quote from Schopenhauer? we can't will what we will. So you can't pay me to like what you have to say to me. No promises. I'm not going to be nice necessarily. But that's an option. America First Plus, check it out. What else? The Red Scare collaboration just dropped today. That is the third out of 4 collaborations from New York. Very mixed reaction. I don't know why. People love me. They don't like the girls. People loved what I had to say. They loved the fit. They didn't like the vocal fry. I like them. You know, and Anna, she is what she is. She's Jewish. It's okay. That's fine, guys. It's fine. She is what she is. She's Jewish. But she's actually very smart. I didn't agree with everything she said, but she asked, I thought, very good questions. I thought they were very effective questions. And I was pleasantly surprised because normally I don't get asked good questions. Normally I and I don't want to take shots at anybody that I've done other interviews with, but normally the questions are fairly predictable. She has some pretty interesting questions, and Dasha did too. She's a lot of fun also. So I thought it was good, but people were saying, why are you hanging out with these e-girls? Why hanging out? I don't know, because it's fun, because it's funny, because it's a collaboration that's a long time in the making. And it's a little fan service. Dasha loves the show. And I watch Succession, so we're mutual fans of each other, but I thought it was great. I will say they don't talk very loud. I don't know if that's because they weren't born here or if I don't know what that is, but no joke. I pull up and they're talking like this. They're like, hi, welcome to Red Scare. I'm Dasha. I'm Anna. This is how I was like, do I need to whisper? Like, why are we talking like this? I was like, can I, because I'm like, I feel like I'm yelling. I feel like I'm screaming at the top of my lungs. They literally, so I don't know if that's why it sounds like vocal fry, because you know what? I think what they do is they do that quiet talking, they do the low talking, and then I think they crank the gain up. I think they crank the gain on the microphone. Am I right? They crank the gain all the way up, and I think that makes it sound more gravelly, more of like a vocal fry. Because I didn't really hear the vocal fry in person. I didn't really hear too much of a vocal fry. It wasn't bad in person, but they were quiet. So I'm wondering if maybe that's what it is. But I was like, could you speak up, please? Like, no, but they were great. They were very nice, very, very good conversation. Weird worlds colliding because they come from the BAP world and they confronted me. They pressed me. They said, so, hey man, so what's going on? You think we're owned by Peter Thiel? You really think that? I said, yeah. I said, I think so. They said, we don't get money from Peter Thiel. I said, but he built the roads. Okay, all roads lead back to Stanford University. All roads lead to Rome. So they claim they're not funded by Peter Thiel. I saw some of these like left-wing people that hate them. Some of these left-wing types that hate Red Scare and hate the BAP scene. Like Meta Prime, he was like, why did Nick go and talk to them? He knows what they are. I'm like, I don't know. It's funny. It's just a good, everybody, listen, I don't mean to go like Dave Rubin, but don't burn this book. You're getting a little like progressive left. You're getting a little woke tard on me. I never thought I'd hear that. I'm over here. You know me. No one's hitting the Peter Thiel thing harder than me. And I called them out on the show. I said, you're caping for Vance? It is disgusting. I called them out. And I get Meta Prime on Twitter. He's like, why are you platforming them? It's like, whoa, what the fuck? What happened? You're getting a little like Harry Sisson on me. Little like woke tard here. Don't burn this book. Don't burn this fucking Patreon, man. Relax. Let's just open up the conversation. Starting to feel like 2015, man. So I just thought it was it's just like a funny collaboration. She's throwing her geek bar all over the place. She's throwing her jewel on the floor so she could pick it up. Oops, I dropped my geek bar. Oh, let me get that for you. So it was fun. Now, the fourth collaboration is coming out on Monday. That's with Gavin McInnes, my best friend. I love Gavin. I know we disagree on Israel. Look, this guy just loves Jews. And look, I love him too, but in more of like God tells us to love our enemies sort of way. It's like sort of a catch. Gavin's like, no, but Gavin loves the Jews like I love McDonald's. I love the Jews like I love, I don't know. I love them like Jesus loved Judas in a certain sense. Like they're bringing about the good in the world in a roundabout way and in a sort of adversarial way. Gavin loves these guys, and he'll tell you about it. So we disagree very strongly because that's kind of like, that's like my thing. And that's sort of like his thing is the opposite. No, but he's a great guy. We had a lot of fun. We hung out. He's the GOAT. He put me on. But that'll be coming out Monday. We did this vicious debate. And then Tuesday, he's putting a second episode behind a paywall. And that's where we're just talking. We're just kind of hanging out. But he kept bringing up the Jewish thing. Gavin's like obsessed with Jews. I don't know. It's like all he talks about. So even in the second one, we were trying to just hang out, but he couldn't help himself. He just kept bringing it back. I'm like, is this Jake Shields' podcast? Is this David Duke? I say that affectionately. I'm teasing a little bit. I'm just joking around a little bit, but that's the fourth collaboration. So it was Dave Smith, Sneeko, Red Scare, Gavin is on Monday and Tuesday. Those will be the big collaborations. A lot of fun. I like these people. I like these. Hey, I like these people. And we don't agree on everything, but it's so funny. That's how far we've come. It used to be the case that people would not platform me. And if they did, they would say, listen, I don't agree with everything he says, but. And now it's reversed. Now I'm like going on Gavin and Red Scare, and people are like, why are you giving them a platform? I'm on their show. I don't agree with everything they say. No, but it's fun. No, but we had a good time. So those are the latest collaborations. Let me know what you think. I thought they were fun. I thought it was good stuff. Love hanging out with my diverse group of friends. You know what's funny though? None of them are American. Well, I shouldn't say that. Sneeko and Dave are American, but I was thinking about it. Dasha and Anna are not American. They're from Russia and Belarus. And Gavin's from Canada. Always beware of the foreign influence. This is something that I'm a big believer in. And I like these people, but you always got to remember who's American. You know what I'm saying? And all these Canadians, they think, it's close enough. They think we don't notice, but I notice. A lot of these Canadians, they come down here and they camouflage the accent. And they think, it's close enough. It's got to be America first, right? Canadians, Russians. I don't care if you have the perfect. I see a lot of Canadian flags. Tyler Russell sends his regards. Tyler Russell from Canada First. Isn't it funny how many of them were Canadian, though? Lauren Southern, Stefan Molyneux, Gavin, Crowder, Faith Goldie, all Canadian. Did you know that? To learn who rules over you. No, but anyway, we're just having a little fun with that. So those are the big collaborations. We're going to move on. We're going to get into the news. Is there anything else? Not really. All right. Well, we'll get on with it. We'll get on with the show. Our first story, we're going to be talking all about this regime change in Venezuela. On to enough messing around. Time for the serious stuff. Our first story, we're talking all about regime change in Venezuela. And this one is, it's sort of a difficult issue for me. And I'll tell you why. I talked a little bit about this the last time we covered Venezuela. There is a big difference between what we would say being a non-interventionist, an isolationist, being anti-war, and opposing the wars that we have been in for the past 25 years. And what do I mean by that? We went to war in Iraq under a false pretense, and that has defined our political order for 20 years. It was a unilateral war against the Security Council, very hypocritical in a sense if we're trying to promote these international institutions and security cooperation and these things. It's this unilateral war. We're abusing the pretext, which is against WMDs, which they didn't even have. Of course, the driving power behind that war was the Israel lobby. And the war goes on for 20 years because of mission creep, because the Israelis wanted us there, because there was this idea that maybe we would be launching invasions against other countries like Syria or Iran. And it became this never-ending counterinsurgency, the purpose of which we didn't even know what it was anymore. Democracy promotion, defending Israel's interests, undermining other countries in the region. And so there's very good reasons to oppose that war. Or, similarly, the never-ending war in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, it started out that we were there to undermine the Taliban and hunt down Osama bin Laden. And within 10 years, without even missing a beat, without skipping a beat, they said, now it's about women voting in elections in Afghanistan. Okay. So very similar there, as well as all the other interventions. And there's a variety of reasons that you might be against the global war on terror, the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq. That is altogether different. Not completely different, but it is independent from being ideologically against war in itself, being ideologically against interventions in general, or being an isolationist, which is being against hostile interventions, but also against international cooperation. And I have always said on my show, my foreign policy view is that we should be America first, not isolationist, not even non-interventionist, and I'm not anti-war. I believe that intervention, and sometimes up to and including war, is a necessary tool. I don't think that that should be the first resort, and I don't think that we should overextend ourselves and our commitments to allies or our efforts to undermine adversaries, but I do believe that interventions are actually frequently necessary, and I think that sometimes war becomes necessary. I think that it's better, it's preferable to use economic tools and use our international institutions as a forum to mediate disputes and decrease the risk of miscalculations or unnecessary conflicts, things of that nature. But I'm not like a libertarian. I'm not a libertarian that says I hate war. I don't believe we should intervene overseas. There's something in principle wrong with these things. And the reason being is because we are the most powerful nation in the world. We have the biggest Navy. We have the biggest Air Force. We have the biggest, most powerful economy and military. And we should use the military to benefit Americans. We should use the military not to change the way the world is, not to police the world, but we should use the military to secure benefits, tangible benefits for Americans. And what would those things be? Resources. We should secure access to resources that we cannot get or that make us richer, and we should secure the supply chains that deliver them. The other reason we should use the military is for, of course, defending the homeland. And to me, that comes in two distinct forms, which is our immediate periphery, which is the Western Hemisphere, the Caribbean, the North and South border, but also the proliferation of nuclear weapons, because if there's a nuclear war, that's not good for anybody. So this is kind of generally where I'm at. And I say that to preface because this is why it's difficult when you approach the Venezuela conversation, because for 10 years, I have been opposed and vocally and adamantly opposed to our interventions in the Middle East. Regime change in Iran, regime change in Syria, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan. I'm opposed to all that. And you start to sound like you're a libertarian, or you start to sound like you're a non-interventionist, when really I'm not. And when it comes to Venezuela, I see in this case, for me, it's a little more complicated, because this is a legitimate interest of the United States. This is in our hemisphere. The entire geostrategic posture of the United States is based on the fact, or it's based on the geographic reality, that the United States is protected by natural barriers. We don't have to have the same anxieties. We don't think the same way as other countries because we don't share a border with other powerful nations like, let's say, Russia or Germany or India or Iran. We're protected by two oceans, and there are no other countries in the North and South American continents that threaten us. And so, in order for us to remain safe, we don't really need to worry as much about what is happening on the Eurasian African continent. That's not an immediate threat or concern, because we're protected from that by the oceans. What we do have to worry about is our island. We do have to worry about is the Caribbean. We have to worry about Central America and South America, because that is what is close. That is what has a land bridge to the United States. That is in our immediate periphery. And that's why we have the Monroe Doctrine, which says that for America to be safe, it is our legitimate sphere of influence, it is our legitimate jurisdiction to govern the Americas. And we don't necessarily need to intervene in the balance of power in Europe or in Asia or in the Middle East. And there's not too much happening in Africa, but what we do need is to control our backyard. That is the traditional American point of view. And when it comes to Venezuela, you have a socialist regime which is aligned against the United States, ideologically aligned against the United States ever since the Bolivarian Revolution. And what's more, Venezuela is aligned with our strategic competitors, Russia and China. So for me, this is a legitimate national security concern and a strategic concern for the United States in a way that Iran or Hamas or Hezbollah or Libya or Syria or Ukraine, even for that matter, is not, because it's right there and it's in our legitimate sphere of influence. It's on our island. You know, rightfully, if you're thinking of these things in the right way, North and South America are basically like a giant island. So it's part of us. And so that's why I'm a little bit more in favor of intervention in Venezuela than in other countries. With that being said, I don't necessarily support any kind of intervention or any kind of way to go about this. And this kind of brings us to the current conversation. The Trump administration has been effectively at war with Venezuela for 5 or 6 years. And by that, I mean, if you recall, in Trump's first term, he brought in John Bolton as his national security advisor. And under the John Bolton Trump administration, we instituted a maximum pressure campaign against the Maduro regime in Venezuela. And we were effectively trying to force regime change. You might remember the name of the opposition leader, Juan Guaido. We tried to make him the president. We ratcheted up the sanctions, enforced the sanctions on their oil. And you might recall during those years, this is when Venezuela experienced a currency crisis, hyperinflation, massive protests, mass starvation. This was by design. You might remember that because this was under the Trump administration policy of basically trying to strangle Venezuela such that it would collapse from within. And a U.S.-backed opposition leader would come to power, and they would realign Caracas to Washington, away from China and Russia. That was a Bolton, Pompeo, Trump policy. And what actually happened, here was the beautiful part, because we tried to strangle this country with sanctions. Their country runs on revenue from oil, and we went after their oil. As a consequence, their currency collapsed. The people started to starve. There was tremendous political disorder in Venezuela. And what typically happens when you see something like that is an exodus of refugees. So why do you think there were 10 million illegal immigrants under the Biden administration? Well, one among many reasons is that we tried to collapse Venezuela and millions of people left the country. Millions of criminals and drug smugglers and ordinary people too fled Venezuela into the United States because we destabilized their nation. And that's how they wound up in Chicago and Houston, Texas, and New York and LA, causing all kinds of problems. And they're not great immigrants either. On average, they have a very low IQ in Venezuela, high Indio admixture. There's a lot of organized crime in Venezuela. They're kidnappers, drug smugglers. Like, these are not great people. And so the consequences of our extremely aggressive backdoor regime change, maximum pressure policy was the refugee crisis, which has metastasized into this illegal immigrant occupation, which we're now trying to reverse. We gave those people temporary protected status. So now Trump is back in power, and he has effectively resumed the same policy. I'm sure you've seen, it's been reported all over, that the United States is building up its force posture off the coast of Venezuela, deploying U.S. Navy destroyers, submarines, Air Force assets, reconnaissance in the islands surrounding Venezuela, on the coast of Venezuela. And we've been bombing what the administration is claiming are small drug smuggling vessels manned by crews of 5 to 12 people. I think there's been at least 3 high-profile instances where these boats have been destroyed and the crew murdered by the United States. And as this campaign goes on of both maximum pressure and military escalation, it seems now that both the United States and Venezuela are anticipating an imminent regime change war. In recent days, Venezuela is putting shipping containers and heavy machinery blocking major access roads into Venezuela. They're taking control over air defense at their airports. And the United States has been signaling that they might begin operations on Venezuelan soil, meaning that they will be launching airstrikes or missile strikes from naval vessels against what they say are drug smuggling operations inside Venezuela on their actual territory. And everybody could see where this is headed. And where this is headed is a decapitation. Earlier this year, the Trump administration put a $50 million bounty on the head of Nicolás Maduro, which incentivizes traitors inside of his government. If they want to sell out, they anticipate the regime is crumbling, they can collaborate with the United States and get Maduro assassinated, get him arrested, capture him, overthrow his government, something like that. So this is we're revisiting this maximum pressure campaign on Venezuela. Now, it's in this context, on the cusp of another war, that there's some reporting from the New York Times, and this is disputed, but there is a piece out in the New York Times today which says that the Maduro regime in Venezuela actually offered the United States a deal. So why are we doing all of this? It is because the Venezuelan regime is socialist. They're ideologically third worldist, socialist. They're against Washington. They're against the West. They're aligned with China, Russia, and Iran. They get Russian defense equipment. They have Chinese investment. They collaborate with the Iranian military. This is all very worrying for the United States. And this is why we want to overthrow that regime, and we want Venezuela to buy American military equipment. We want Venezuela to have American investment. We want their oil. We want their gold. We want their stuff. We don't want them to be used as a base of operations to undermine U.S. influence in the Caribbean and in South America. Well, the Maduro regime offered the United States a deal. And I haven't seen this reported anywhere else. I don't see it being talked about a lot, but apparently Rick Grenell, who is in the Trump administration, he's one of the envoys, is in talks with the Maduro regime, some of the high-ranking personnel, that Venezuela is going to stop collaborating with Russia, China, and Iran. They're going to give us their oil and gold revenue. They're going to give us the revenue from future oil and gold projects, and basically they're going to give up. They're waving the white flag. And the catch is that the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has vetoed this. They offered us a deal. They said, you can have all the oil, all the gold. They have the largest proven oil reserves in the world, massive amounts of gold. They're giving it all away. They said, we give up. We want to join the United States because Maduro doesn't want to die. He knows that's going to be a one-sided conflict. He knows the jig is up. They said, we'll give you all of our natural resource wealth, and we will strategically align with you. Just don't go to war. Rubio vetoes the deal and says, not good enough. Maduro has to go. And this is the story. It says, quote, Venezuelan officials hoping to end their country's clash with the United States offered the Trump administration a dominant stake in Venezuela's oil and other mineral wealth in discussions that lasted for months, according to multiple people close to the talks. Under a deal discussed between a senior U.S. official and Mr. Maduro's top aides, the Venezuelan strongman offered to open up all existing and future oil and gold projects to American companies, give preferential contracts to American business, reverse the flow of Venezuelan oil exports from China to the United States, and slash his country's energy and mining contracts with Chinese, Iranian, and Russian firms. Okay. Well, isn't that what we want? Isn't that everything that we want and more? It sounds too good to be true, but if you can secure this, is that not what we want in Venezuela? Is their gold, their oil, their minerals, stop their collaboration and cooperation with our adversaries and align with the United States? What's wrong with this? It says the Trump administration ended up rebuffing the economic concessions and cut off diplomacy with Venezuela last week. The move killed the deal, at least for now, according to people close to the discussion. Though the United States has been targeting what it calls drug boats, the cutoff of diplomacy, the military buildup near Venezuela, and the increasingly strident threats against Maduro by Trump administration officials have led many in both countries to think that the real objective is Mr. Maduro's removal. Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, has been the leading voice in the administration's push to oust Maduro. He has called him an illegitimate leader who is a fugitive from American justice and has been skeptical of the diplomatic approach conducted by Special Envoy Richard Grenell. Okay, who cares? Who cares? It's like he's giving us gold, oil, minerals, contracts, money. He's just gonna give it all up. And we're like, no, not good enough because you're a bad guy. You're a bad hombre. You're an illegitimate leader. Who gives a fuck? Who cares? Take the money. It says, while Mr. Grenell and Venezuelan officials made progress on economic issues, they failed to agree on Maduro's political future. Grenell and Maduro's envoys negotiated a deal. During this time, the leader of Venezuela's main opposition movement, Maria Corina Machado, pitched her own economic proposal. She argued that even greater economic wealth, up to $1.7 trillion in 15 years, awaited U.S. companies in Venezuela if her movement launched a political transition, meaning regime change. Okay, so why? But why? And here's why I started the conversation by talking about non-intervention, war, regime change. What I like about Trump is he recognizes that the power of the American military frequently comes from not even actually using it. It is the deterrent power of the military. War only becomes inevitable when both sides think they can test the willingness or the ability of the other side to enforce their will, basically. In other words, Venezuela knows they would lose a war. They don't want to find that out the hard way. They know that already. They know that if the United States really wanted to, that we could come in, kill their leaders, take their stuff, and it's over, and they could not resist at all. It's a small country. It's like 30 million people. They're poor. They don't have a big military. The government is so corrupt. The people are against the regime or ambivalent. So they're not going to put up resistance. And these leaders, they don't want to die and they don't want to be martyrs. For what? They're criminals. They're crooks. And so the power of the U.S. military is that you just have it. It has a weight by itself. And the only time a country is going to test the U.S. military is if they think that they can either overcome the U.S. military in terms of force, that they'll be able to destroy more equipment or kill more personnel or strategically or tactically defeat the U.S. military like a China or Russia, or they're testing the U.S. willingness to use the military. Like, let's say, Iran, for example, or some other country. They know they would lose if the United States went to war, but they doubt that the United States is willing to do it. So the U.S. military has deterrent power. Trump understands that, and that is a good foreign policy. Throwing our weight around, using the weight and the might of the military without actually using the guns, without actually shooting, to get U.S. interests, to secure concessions and benefits for Americans. And this is a very tangible one. Venezuela has gold and oil, and they don't efficiently extract either of them. Because of the sanctions, the corruption, their government is inefficient. They're under attack from the West. The people are demoralized. If the United States came in and managed these resources, it would make us richer. We would have more of them. We would have a greater share of them, and Venezuela would extract more of them. Those are tangible benefits. That's more energy for the United States, which we badly need. It's more gold for the United States, which is good. Whatever other minerals they have at their disposal. And it's another country that's aligned with the United States, another country we don't have to worry about. That's a good deal. And so you look at the foreign policy being conducted by the Trump administration, this is what he always does. It's these demonstrations of power, demonstrations of force, exercises, small targeted strikes to demonstrate that we have this military, we're willing to use it, you don't want to mess with us, so you should just let us have our way. And that I'm totally in favor of. But in this case, this is a very interesting contrast, because we sort of got what we wanted here, didn't we? It worked. Maduro is convinced. He's scared. He knows we are coming for him. He knows that we can destroy him. We're willing to do it, and we're there. He sees the ships off the coast. Do you think this guy wants to die? He's a petty communist thief. So he's not a martyr like Hamas. You know, they want to die in a holy war or something. He sees it. He's giving it up. He says, all right, look, I recognize this is over. It's coming down. You can have the gold, oil, whatever you want. Isn't that the point? Did you forget that that's the whole point of having a military? We have a huge Navy. We have a huge Air Force. We bring it to their shore. They freak out. They say, all right, take whatever you want. Take the oil, the gold, and we'll stop doing business with Russia and China. The whole point then is to work out a deal. And then you don't need a military intervention, because realistically, this is not a military intervention. We destroyed like 3 tiny boats. That's nothing. And they were either traffickers, human traffickers, drug traffickers. I mean, you know, that's not a real intervention. And there's no war. There's no destabilization. There's no chaos. There's no regime change. You don't get all those negative externalities that come with this, the risks. So why not then accept the deal? It looks like now the deal is off. At least for now. This is what this article says, that last week, the administration shut down all the diplomacy because Rubio, our Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, well, he just wants Maduro's head on a platter because he's an illegitimate ruler. And you have to ask, why is that? What is really the point there? Because if you have regime change in Venezuela, now you have all kinds of problems. Does Venezuela activate terrorists in the United States? Maybe that's far-fetched, but you don't know that. Millions of Venezuelans have come here illegally in the past 5 or 6 years. And if Venezuela had some kind of dead man switch, if they anticipate that the United States is looking to oust them eventually, is that a possibility that the war will be visited on our shores? You can never discount that. That's one, and maybe that's the least likely. But the greater risk, what if you find yourself in a protracted counterinsurgency? Who comes to power next? They say this opposition leader. Well, what if there isn't buy-in? What if there's competing factions? What if it turns into a civil war? What if there's a revival of legitimate narco-terrorism like the FARC in Colombia? What happens if non-state actors, drug smugglers, other criminal elements? What if you get a resurgence of that kind of violence in South America, Central America, or the United States? Do we want to actually have U.S. military forces occupying and fighting Venezuela? And what's more, we're in other wars. We're in Ukraine. We're trying to bolster Taiwan. We're maybe just averted a crisis in the Middle East. Is another war, another military commitment really what we want? Even if it'll be quick and relatively easy, that's assuming if everything goes according to plan. Do we really need another war? Do we really need to be fighting, looking for Maduro in the jungle, looking for his loyalists or something like that? And that's not even to think about what happens when this society undergoes a convulsion. We have no idea what's on the other side of this. Terrorism, destabilization, war, you never know what you're going to get. Are we then going to get another exodus of Venezuelans? Will it destabilize the neighboring countries like Brazil and Colombia? Will there be spillover into Guyana? And will people then flee to the United States? Will we be then forced to accept them like we've been forced to accept Haitians, Venezuelans, Salvadorians, Guatemalans? Like, what are we thinking here? And like I said at the beginning, this is the contrast between America First and neoconservatism. Because America First says, look, we don't give a shit about Venezuela's affairs. Rubio says, well, he's an illegitimate leader and a fugitive from justice. Well, who's to say? Who is to say? What difference does it make? They're all corrupt down there. They always have been. It's always been like that down there, forever. Is that really what matters? Or is what actually matters their strategic alignment and whether they're giving us their resources? If it's good for they have this socialist government today. Who cares if they have it tomorrow? As long as we're getting their oil, their gold, they're working with us and not the enemy. But Rubio has always been a neocon from the very beginning. Ever since he won his primary against Charlie Crist, this guy's been a turncoat, and people speculate maybe they have blackmail on him. He owes very powerful patrons in South Florida. You know, he comes from Florida, a country that is made up of pro-Israel Jews, escapees from Cuba, Venezuela, Haiti, that hate communism, all these Cuban exiles, Venezuelan refugees that hate the communists. And we were led to believe by these people at NatCon, at Yoram Hazony's National Conservatism, we were led to believe by American Moment and American Conservative and all these other outfits in the new right that Rubio turned over a new leaf, that he changed. For me, I thought it was a huge problem when Trump appointed him to be Secretary of State because we all knew he was a neocon. He was a fellow traveler with Nikki Haley, no different. No different. He's just as bad as the rest of them. He's like, represents the diversity in the GOP. You know, she's Indian, he's Cuban, so he's a millennial Cuban. He's a little less than white, off-white Republican, anti-communist, neocon warrior. Like, he's everything wrong with the GOP. He's part of the problem. He got appointed to this very important role. I said, this is a complete disaster. Why not just have Nikki Haley then? Or Tim Scott or something? But people tried to reassure us. They said, no, he's America First now. Didn't you see his NatCon speech? He sounds great. Yeah, they say things all the time. Now that he's in this position, he's insisting it's not even good enough that we get everything that we want from the country, but that we actually have the regime change. Like the regime change is the point. Why? And that's where inside this Trump administration, you really need to evaluate the specific people that are involved. Because what I always liked about Trump is this is the language that he would use. When he said about the Iraq war, he said, look, you went in, take the oil. And when he was talking about Syria, he says, who cares about Assad? Just kill ISIS. In other words, what are the tangible American interests? Insofar as ISIS is real and not a CIA Mossad creation, they were spreading this ideology in America and Europe that is actually harming us. So let's just kill them. And to the extent that we're in Iraq, who gives a shit whether they vote? Just take their oil. Just have American energy companies come in and let's just take the energy. It's transactional. That's how the world is. That's realism. We are in a great power competition with China and Russia for the alignment of middle powers, for the alignment of resource-rich countries. And we're in a battle with Russia and China over supply chains and the resources that fuel the supply chains. Specifically things like energy, rare earths, minerals, and then the shipping routes that transit those raw materials. So in this new era of competition, who cares whether Iran is Islamist or monarchist? You know, people say, I had this debate with Gavin. He said, you don't want regime change in Iran? I'm like, who cares? Like, seriously. Who cares if women in Afghanistan vote? Like, these people are primitive. It doesn't even matter. Who cares if Putin's a war criminal? Yeah, it's Russia. They're brutal. Who cares if Venezuela is run by some corrupt, petty tyrant? It's South America. They're all like that. It's always been like that. Just take their shit. Get as many countries on our side of the ledger so that we can take their shit. I don't know, is that complicated? But on the other side of this debate, you have the ideological neocons like Rubio, like John Ratcliffe, the CIA director. You have these other people that insist, no, that's not good enough. We need a U.S. puppet in place. We need this female resistance leader that's pro-democracy. Their election was fake. Dude, our election was fake. You think our elections are real? They said Maduro lost the 2024 election. Yeah, Biden lost the 2020 election. We want to start with that? So Trump is not, unfortunately, his administration is not, like I said, what we thought it was, or what it was sold to us, pitched to us as in 2024. They said this is the administration of no new wars. And you know what that means is, like, on some level, at this point in time, it is contrary to our interests to be in wars. Because what is a war? A war is a protracted conflict. So it's not dropping some bombs. It's not threatening force. It's like what's happening in Ukraine. This is not good for us. The war in Ukraine is not good for Europe. It's not good for America. Let's just stop. And opening up a new can of worms in Venezuela, that's not really in our interest either. We actually have security priorities here. That doesn't make a lot of sense. And what we're getting now in this administration is on every front, there's just this unwillingness to let it go. In Ukraine, we're now debating giving them Tomahawk missiles and talking about giving them coordinates to strike deep inside Russian territory. Why? Why are we doing this? We're giving Israel billions of dollars in foreign aid, bombing Iran, and we just secured the ceasefire in Gaza. We'll see how that goes. Now in Venezuela, we had a deal on the table. They're insisting, no, there's no deal unless there's regime change and a political transition. Okay, well, they're never going to go for that. The whole basis of the deal is that he wants to stay in power. You get to stay in power, but you have to do what we say. If you insist he has to go, then he's going to obstinately refuse, and we have to go to war. Why? Why do we want to do this? So unfortunately, the real story is about the state of the Republican Party and the Trump administration. And this was my concern from the very beginning, which is this. Trump started out in 2016, if you recall, with very good rhetoric on this. He said, why can't we get along with Russia? Why can't we leverage China or leverage Russia against China? He said, let's bring the troops home from Afghanistan and Iraq. He said, and what's more, let's bring them home from South Korea and Germany while we're at it. Or if we can't do that, make them pay for it. He said, let's stay in Iraq, but take their oil. So the rhetoric started out very good. And my concern for the entire time was, are you going to actually institutionally change the GOP and the deep state to reflect that rhetoric? Are you going to fill up the DOD, the State Department, the CIA with people that believe in that sort of ideology, this restrainer, prioritizer ideology? That kind of foreign policy? Are you actually going to make the personnel changes at the Republican Party and inside the security state so that when you leave office or when you return to office, while you're in office, these people are going to be pushing in the same direction? Or if you fill up your administration with people like Rex Tillerson, Mike Pompeo, John Ratcliffe, Marco Rubio, you're only going to secure the continuity of the previous foreign policy. That was always the issue. And you look at it today, it's crazy. In 2015, he said, let's withdraw from Afghanistan. Now he's saying we want Bagram Air Force Base back. He wants to go back to Afghanistan. In 16, he said we should get along with Russia. Now they're talking about bombing Russia with Tomahawk missiles. In 2016, he said, let's get out of the Middle East. Now we're bombing Iran and saying we'll do it again. Maybe regime change in Iran is a good thing. Literally repeating the same mistake as the Iraq war. It's happening like just on every front. And what is clear is that his inner circle is hopelessly captured. We thought by electing Trump, he would go in and he would change the personnel. Like he would go in and he would go into Central Command and he would go into the DOD and he would go into the CIA and he would fire all these people that are prosecuting the wars. He'd fire these like Victoria Nuland types. He would disassemble that, like the people that have been pushing this kind of thinking for 30 years, and he would put in place new people like Douglas McGregor as a perfect example, leading the charge, or like Dan Caldwell, who got fired. You know, he would put in place these sorts of people. Even a Josh Hawley might be preferable, and I'm not even as big as fan, but better than Rubio. You'd have to think on some level. But instead, what happened is the reverse, which is that his inner circle got infiltrated by the neocons. In other words, we thought he would penetrate the deep state and infiltrate it with America Firsters. No, his inner circle got infiltrated and replaced with neocons. And that's why Pete Hegseth's inner circle got purged in Signalgate. That's why Rubio has now absorbed the National Security Council, and the guy's a neocon. And that's why this fucking Cuban exile is in charge of our foreign policy, and it's not good enough we get the golden oil. He says Maduro has to go. Okay, man. It's kind of ironic in a way. It's like how Antony Blinken went to Israel and said, I'm not just American, I'm a Jew also. We have Marco Rubio going to Venezuela. I'm not just American, I'm a Cuban also. I'm the son of a bartender and a maid. Remember that bullshit? I'm the son of a bartender and a maid who fled communism. Fuck you. Take their stuff. Take their stuff now. And this is why I've been pushing this so strongly for 10 years. I want groypers to go to Yale, go to Stanford, go to Harvard, infiltrate the government. We need the smartest young people to get jobs at the Pentagon, at the Department of War, at DHS. Yes, at the CIA. And, you know, that guy, Dan Caldwell, I kind of make fun of him for crying a little bit, but we need guys like that. We need young whippersnappers like him. He's probably like my age, but we need young guys like that, a new generation to rise through the ranks in the security state, because personnel is policy. Only if we actually control those levers, only if our guys control those levers, do we actually see change. If we are getting outmaneuvered constantly, like, look, we elect Trump. Yeah, Trump agrees with us, but who does he appoint? Do you follow? People say, well, we have to make sure Republicans win. And Republicans win the White House, they win the Senate, and Trump agrees with us, but he appoints neocons. The Senate confirms neocons. Neocons run the departments and agencies, and they hire as their deputies and their deputies' deputies other neocons from their office, from their campaign, you know, from the other neocons, from the think tanks. That's what they do. And because they're good at this stuff, they outmaneuver the trusting face, the trusting endomorphic face of Dan Caldwell. You know, he seems like a nice enough guy, but he's getting outmaneuvered and shanked in the back. He's getting dragged through the streets of Politico and crying about it on Tucker Carlson. So we need to get a little bit smarter, is my point. We need to get a little bit smarter. The national security state is the center of everything, and it's filled up with Israeli spies, ideological neocons who are accomplices frequently of the Israeli spies. We need to fill it up with American patriots, because when you look at a country like China or Russia, their security state is filled up with ethnic Russians and Chinese. And the state is total. The business interests do not overpower the state. The contractors do not overpower the state. The state sets the strategy. The state sets the priorities. And the state is filled with patriots. The nucleus of the state is national security. So this is where Trump went wrong. And look, he made some gestures, like you could kind of see the future here. When Trump destroyed the, USAID, that was a gesture in the right direction. You literally need to go in there and fire everybody and then destroy the department. Like, you need to demolish the building and make it legally not exist anymore. And you need to go into the State Department and fire everybody. You need to get them to train their replacements and then Order 66, fire everybody, like literally everybody. And it just needs to be a new institution. That's the only way. He had the right idea, but they didn't do it in a smart way. They didn't do enough. They didn't act quickly enough. And now all these forces are reasserting themselves. And so this Kurilla at CENTCOM, Rubio at State, these are the types of, Radcliffe at CIA, these are the types of people that are dragging us to hell. And Rick Grinnell, I'm not a fan, okay? He's like a gay borderline neocon. But he's someone that's maybe more aligned with Trump, trying to deliver a good deal for us, and Rubio squashes the deal. It's really a story of the Trump administration. It cannot realize its full potential if it doesn't take personnel seriously. Happened in the first term, deja vu all over again. That's why I didn't vote. Happened in the first term, John Bolton was running the National Security Council. He was tightening the screws on Venezuela. Trump did TPS, let all these Venezuelans come here, and it's deja vu. They're doing the same thing with Secretary of State and Security Advisor Rubio, he has his heart set. He wants regime change. It's the same story, and it's bullshit. We did it. I remember in the first term, John McEntee became the chief of staff, or he became the head of PPO, I should say, the personnel office in January 2020, and he started firing everybody. But it was too little too late. We were 3 years in. That should have happened on day one. Now, the right move in 2025 would be to do Project 2025, would be for Trump to bring in somebody like McEntee or himself and do the loyalty pledges on day one. Swear the loyalty oath, subject yourself to an America First interview, and if you don't pass, you're out. And that's how you get an America First foreign policy where you're actually making solid moves. You're actually writing a tariff schedule. You're actually pulling us out of Iraq and Syria. You're actually just cutting the funding for Ukraine and forcing them to make a deal. You're making a deal with Venezuela. So, look, there's good people in this administration, and I know because I just know that. There are good people in this administration. Excuse me. They're trying to level up at the Department of War. There are America Firsters. There's like an institutional battle happening. But it just shouldn't be like this, you know? Trump won. It shouldn't be a fight. It should be like you're packing your shit and leaving. You know? Why are we doing this? Trump has won 3 times now. And this second one shouldn't have even happened, basically. The level of second chance should not even be possible. The idea that we're once again, it's October of the first year, we're staring down the barrel of the midterms, and it's like a tug of war between Dan Caldwell and like some dipshit neocon. What are we doing? So anyway, that's that. But I do want to move on. I want to get into the Qatar Air Base, which has everybody up in arms. And well, I don't know how much of this you guys have seen, but the big story this week is that the Trump administration has approved a Qatari Air Force base on U.S. soil. It's a U.S. Air Force base, but Qatar is paying for a facility inside of it where the actual Qatari military will be. It's their facility, it's their personnel, and they're going to be training on F-16 fighter jets in American airspace. And this is a deal that has been in the works for a few years. So they did the environmental impact study under Biden. This had been in the works for some time. You can't blame Trump for this totally. But I saw this and I was shocked. I looked into the details. It's real. They're putting Qatari Air Force on our soil. This is a story from CNN. We'll read through it and discuss. It says, quote, the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, announced on Friday that the U.S. will allow Qatar to build an Air Force facility at Mountain Home Air Force Base in Idaho, which will host Qatari F-15 fighter jets and pilots who will train alongside U.S. troops. Hegseth said, quote, the location will host a contingent of Qatari F-15s and pilots to enhance our combined training, increase the lethality interoperability of the Qatari Air Force. He said, it's just another example of our partnership, and I hope you know, Your Excellency, he said to his counterpart, the Defense Minister of Qatar, Your Excellency, you can count on us. The announcement of the deal comes just weeks after Trump signed an executive order for the U.S. to guarantee the security of Qatar, a significant commitment to a non-NATO Arab ally. Israel had bombed Qatar several days earlier as part of an operation against Hamas officials in Doha. But sources told CNN that the plan to build the facility has been in the works for several years. A U.S. official said the agreement is routine and something the Air Force has done for decades with other partners. Hegseth later wrote on Friday, the U.S. military has a long-standing partnership with Qatar, including today's announced cooperation with F-15QA aircraft, emphasizing there will be no Qatari-owned base in the United States. Not a fan. I don't like this. And look, there is now this very popular narrative among the pro-Israel camp where whenever you talk about AIPAC, you talk about the Adelsons, you talk about the Israeli influence in the United States, the Israelis will always retort and say, well, what about Qatar? What about the Qataris? Which is bullshit. Because the level of influence of the Qataris, it doesn't even come close. We're not fighting Qatar's wars. We're not giving $30 billion to Qatar. Like, that's not, if anything, they're giving us money. You know, if anything, they are a very rich country and they're giving us stuff. They're giving us business. They're investing in America. They've got oil wealth. They've got facilities for this. It doesn't even come close. There's no Holocaust education class for Qatar. There's no Qatari curriculum at the Middle East Studies Department at the universities being imposed by the education department. Like, it's apples and oranges. With that being said, look at the level of cooperation here. Qatar is giving us a U.S. Air Force One jet, which is a pretty lavish and conspicuous gift. That's one. Two, after Israel bombs them, we're giving them a NATO-like security guarantee. We're effectively saying if Qatar gets attacked, we will defend them in a war, like we would defend Germany, Italy. We don't have a treaty with them, but we are now obligated to defend Qatar in a war. And now the latest is that we're letting them train on our soil. So Qatari Air Force will be flying in our airspace, flying their jets from their facility at our base. And, you know, if it was Israel, everybody would have a problem with this. If Israel gave us a jet, you know what people be saying? Check it for pagers. Check it for explosives. What's the price tag? Is that a bribe? If it was Israel, people would say, why are we giving them a security guarantee so we could go and fight their wars? If Israeli fighter jets were flying over America, people would say, shoot them down. Shoot them down. Now what? We have an Israeli Air Force here too? And they'd be right. And I don't like this either. The U.S., I like what Steve Bannon said about this. He said, the United States is sacred soil. We should have no foreign troops here. We're the empire. Why should we have any foreign troops on our soil? And they give these arguments. They say, well, they need to practice on American territory because they don't have the airspace. Qatar's a small country. There's airspace rights controlled by their neighbors, so they don't have enough room to practice on the jets. Okay, well, why don't you work something out then with Saudi Arabia? You know? Why don't you work something out with one of these other countries? Why don't you work something out with the Emirates? They can't fly the planes over there? Why don't you set them up in Turkey? Why don't you set them up in, maybe that doesn't make sense. Why don't you set them up literally anywhere else? Why do they have to be here? I don't like that. And I have to say that just for the sake of fairness, for the sake of objectivity, we're against all foreign influence, whether it's coming from Israel, whether it's coming from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the Emirates, Turkey, Russia, China, the United Kingdom for that matter. Russia is a big one. We're against all of that. And I've really become more awake to that in the past few years because you could actually see that there are some very distinct foreign influence operations in the United States, other than Israel. There's a lot of involvement with Turkey. There's a lot of involvement in many cases, I think, with Russia. You look at a guy like Jackson Hinkle. Jackson Hinkle was dating a pageant winner in Russia. He was getting tipped off about investment opportunities by Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister. And I know this is a guy who many people respect as like an Israel critical voice, but this guy's taking foreign money. This guy is taking money from a foreign country. You wouldn't trust anybody that was married to Miss Israel. You wouldn't trust anybody that was married or dating a pageant winner in Israel getting set up for favorable contracts by the Israeli foreign minister and promoting Israel's wars. But when it comes to Russia, it's different. When it comes to China, when it comes to Pakistan, India. And this is very similar to the conversation about Venezuela. We have to purge the nucleus of the state, which is the national security apparatus, from any foreign influence. We can have allies, we can have treaties, we can cooperate with other countries, but they got to be kept the fuck out of any of our most sensitive dealings, off of our soil, out of our business, out of our government, out of our media for that matter. Because you could see it is just like a buffet. It is a feeding frenzy. The level of Indian money that's coming in now, it's so obvious. And I've seen people, even people that I like, they're literally peddling Indian propaganda. They're registered for FARA peddling Congolese propaganda, registering under FARA to push U.S. intervention in the Congo against Rwanda. Really? It's everywhere you look. And by the way, people in D.C. they're gonna be nodding their heads when I say this. Everything in U.S. politics, in D.C. in particular, is awash with foreign cash. Everybody is effectively a lobbyist for a foreign government in D.C. Where do you think all these like consultant contracts come from? If someone from D.C. says they're a consultant, you should punch them in their fucking face. Because 9 times out of 10, they're taking money from a foreign country. That's what that means. You're a undeclared lobbyist. So much of that is going on in D.C. You wouldn't even believe it. And you know, to the point of many pro-Israel types, it isn't just Israel. Israel represents a unique problem because many Americans, look, the center of global Jewry is America. Global Jewry has moved throughout the centuries and the millennia from the Middle East to Western Europe to Eastern Europe to the United States. And so now the center of global Jewry is America and Israel. And so that's kind of like a uniquely bad problem because it's like we have millions and millions and millions of Jews here and they're only loyal to Israel and themselves. And so it's like they don't even need to be paid. Like they're working to get rich to help themselves in Israel. That's unique. But it's like Americans are selling out America to foreign countries for petty cash. In some cases, there's a lot of largesse. But they're selling out to the United Arab Emirates, to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, to Qatar, to Turkey, Russia, China, India. It's all there. And that's why I really believe that a future plank, if there's going to be an America First presidential campaign, whoever it is, I'm not saying myself, but for somebody, there needs to be a bipartisan consensus that there can be no foreign lobbying. Like the texture of what it needs to be is an anti-corruption purge. The president leading the intelligence services needs to root out and destroy all foreign influence in the United States, all foreign money, all foreign influence from India, from China, from Russia, yes, from Israel, from Turkey, Qatar, all these countries, they got to get it out. And you recognize that that's actually going to be a difficult problem because it is intertwined with our diversity problem. You understand? The more of these people that we take from every other country, the more that they just become a conduit for their country's influence. So these people come here, they get a green card, they have kids, their kids have the golden ticket, which is citizenship, and then they are free and clear to lobby without any kind of, there's almost no way to stop that without any restraint. In other words, if you're an Indian on a green card or a Chinese student that eventually becomes a legal resident, if you're an illegal Hispanic and you have a kid, all these children of these people, they all get citizenship, and then they all get to vote in our elections based on the interest of India, China, Mexico, on behalf of immigrants, on behalf of foreign students, foreign labor. And that's when you realize it isn't just an illegal immigrant problem, it's a foreigner problem. Like, these are foreigners. They're working on behalf of their foreign country. And I don't care what paperwork they have. I don't care how good their fucking English is. I don't care if they watch The Summer That I Turned Pretty. They're not assimilated because they're advocating on behalf of their own country and the people of their country and the bridge that they have built for that country's interests. Which is that they're going to come here and say, well, we need more. Like Vivek Ramaswamy is going to come here and say, we need limitless H-1Bs. And who is that good for? That is good for Indians. That is good for India. That is not good for America. Ilhan Omar can come here and say, we need to recognize Somaliland. That's good for Somalia. That's good for her. And the same goes for all these illegal Hispanics. The same goes for Chinese students. The same goes for like American Jewry. Same goes for Muslims. They set up these colonies here. That's why I say like nativism, nationalism, all these things are intertwined. They all go together in a certain sense. It's a package deal. So that's that. I'm getting really sick. I'm just sick of all the foreign stuff because America is such a great and powerful country, but we are shackled. We are a shackled nation. That's why it's called America First, because we have all this wealth and all this power and technology and innovation and entrepreneurship and capital. And we have this truly great country, but it's like Gulliver's Travels. We're being chained down by every other country and this invasion. They're like termites. They're eating away at the foundations of our country. We have to free ourselves. America's like a sleeping giant. The real Americans and the real America is the sleeping giant. If we could just throw off these fucking lobbyists, the foreign capital that's coming in here, and if we could unite as one nation, then we could rule the world. Like, we could really have our way. We could have what we're entitled to. But not as long as we're being pushed around by all these other countries, all these other people that are manipulating our system. That's what Trumpism was supposed to be about. Don't you understand? And Trump distilled that into an aesthetic, into a message, into a campaign. The MAGA hat, that's what it was about. The MAGA hat was about American revanchism. Make America great again. Like, let's be an empire again. Let's be distinctly, recognizably American again. Let's put Americans first. America should be strong and independent and free. And now look at his cabinet. It's like they're doing the bidding of India, Israel. It's a Cuban exile running our foreign policy. It's anything but. Jared Kushner is over there right now with Steve Witkoff kissing the Wailing Wall. They're getting a jet from Qatar. Really? We can't pay for our own Air Force anymore? We can't pay for Air Force One? We got to get it from some Arab sheik? It's sickening. So, and it's funny because Laura Loomer is saying this about Qatar, and she's right, but she just doesn't recognize it about Israel. No more foreign influence, Americans only. Real Americans only. I really think we should appropriate the Know Nothing flag, the beware of foreign influence. We really need to hoist that flag up. That is the rallying cry. Josh Hammer has Israeli wife and kids. Beware foreign influence. You are not native. Get out. Jackson Hinkle, you are dating Miss Moscow from Russia. Beware foreign influence. Get out. Treason. But as the diversity increases, there's just a smaller constituency for that. sadly. But anyway, we're going to move on. We're going to take a look at our super chats. We'll see what you guys have to say.
All right, so let's get right to it. So Nick and I are going to have a foundational disagreement when it comes to war. It just is what it is. We feel the same way when it comes to revenge, because I've heard him over and over talk about how revenge is not for man. And I believe he's referring to in the Bible where it says that, you know, revenge is for God, not for man. So we agree on that. I'm open to somebody explaining to me what war is necessary, because the thing about it is when Nick says that, you know, certain wars are necessary and certain times we need to intervene in foreign affairs, I'm open to it. I'm against it. Let me be clear. I'm against it, but I'm also open to an area where I may be wrong if provided with new information. So my question would be, what intervention makes sense? What intervention is justified? What war is justified? And once you justify war for one thing, it's just going to be used and seen as an option that people can tap into for any other area. Nick believes that, or he made the point that war happens or only becomes inevitable when both sides feel they can test the other to enforce their will. That's going to occur. That's going to occur. And even the lead up to war, right? What determines whether or not we'll go to war with Venezuela? Well, apparently we're already killing people on these ships, right? So I don't know if people determine that we're already at war or whatnot. But to me, war, once you justify war, it gives man godly powers. Once you justify war, once you justify killing, what you're doing is you're giving man godly powers. And the reason why I say that is because when man directly violates God's commandments, then man is saying, well, hey, I know God said this, but in this particular area, I'm putting myself above God in order to make a decision that violates God's commandments. You get what I'm saying? So I'm open to hearing it. But what war would you say is justified? What killing is justified? What intervention is justified? And then once you have that, my question would be, so now who plays police over which war is justified to who? We can't even determine in a lot of these situations who's the terrorist and who's the hero. A lot of times it just boils down to what side of the play you're on. You know what I mean? It just boils down to, well, I like the Giants. I'm a Giants fan, so it was a great day, right? Giants just beat the Eagles. It was a great day. Eagles fans are saying it was a terrible day. It simply boils down to which side of the play you're on, which side of the game, which side of the war, right? Because when you look at even, you know, with Christopher Columbus Day, Trump just put that back in play. What makes Christopher Columbus such a hero compared to somebody else that's considered a terrorist, somebody else that's considered, or for terrorizing a group of people, taking their land, thieves, raping and pillaging their women? Like, what makes one or the other justified? And what makes one or the other evil? So this is what I'm saying. All of these things seem to just put man in God's position. Like, we're giving man the ability to play God and determine, well, no, that's okay. Yeah, they can die. No, they can't die. Oh, no, this is justified. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's a very slippery slope. It's a slippery slope. And then when it comes to Maduro, what I found so funny was, as Nick was talking, I was looking up some Chat GPT on Maduro, because I was like, and I've done this before with him, but I was saying, like, you know, is he a bad person? Like, what makes him bad? And Chat GPT, I actually think, did a great job of breaking this down, because their conclusion, or let me first go with why he's seen as a bad or authoritarian leader. Election irregularities, which is funny, because who is America to intervene in another country because of election irregularities? And I think Nick pointed this out when he was discussing how
he believes that Biden cheated in the 2020 election. So, and what's funny is I think Democrats and Republicans believe that both sides cheat. So what makes America the moral high ground to talk about, not only talk about, but to involve ourselves in the politics of another country and justify it based on this? Authoritarian control. The government has restricted opposition parties, jailed political rivals, and censored independent media. Are we talking about Venezuela or are we talking about America? Let me read that again. The government has restricted opposition parties, jailed political rivals. Did they not try to do that with Donald Trump? And censored independent media. I'm pretty sure that Mark Zuckerberg came out and said that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden deliberately not only tried, but actually pushed, and I can't say they forced Mark Zuckerberg and Meta, because that would be taking responsibility off Mark Zuckerberg and Meta, but he was saying that they were forced or encouraged to censor certain people on their platforms, especially regarding 2020. So, and we've seen this with January 6th. It's literally the same thing. So what gives America, once again, the moral high ground to go get involved in another country's stuff, as if we can solve their problems when we can't even solve these very same issues where we are as the greatest country in the world? So let's keep going. Economic collapse. Under his rule, hyperinflation and mismanagement of oil revenues contributed to one of the worst economic crises in modern Latin America, causing millions to flee the country. Well, under his rule, hyperinflation and mismanagement of oil revenues. This sounds like Gavin Newsom. This sounds like what the president can be accused of. You know, when it comes to what people thought the tariffs would cause, all these different things, these crashes that we have regarding our economy, inflation being such a huge issue, mismanagement of funds, mismanagement, like, is this America or is this Venezuela? And the last one that they name on ChatGPT is human rights abuses. So it says reports from the UN and Human Rights Watch document extrajudicial killings, torture, and suppression of protests by security forces. Reports from the UN and Human Rights Watch document extrajudicial killings, torture, and suppression of protests by security forces. Hold on. I want to make sure that I'm clear on extrajudicial. So that's what we do. We look it up, right? Extrajudicial meaning. All right, extrajudicial. I don't know why that's so hard for me to say. Maybe because my nose is, I'm blaming on my nose allergies. Not legally authorized. Okay. So not legally authorized killings, torture, and suppression. I don't think Charlie Kirk was legally authorized. I don't think when Donald Trump was shot in his ear that was legally authorized. I don't think a few weeks later when dude was sitting in the bushes at Donald Trump's golf course, or I think it was at Trump's golf course, you know, ready to take aim at him, I don't think that was legally. I guess that does bring about some interesting question, or an interesting question, but I don't think that was legally authorized. Yeah. So all of this stuff, like, come on, man. It just seems like another situation where, and he was talking about how Rubio, you know, turned down Maduro, pretty much saying like, yo, I'll give you everything, like agreeing to the extortion. Like Maduro said, we'll give you our natural resources. We got the largest oil reserves documented. We got all this gold. We'll give them to you. Like, what else do you want from them? No, that's not enough. We need a regime change. What do you need? Somebody that just will, I mean, I guess do what you say even more. I don't understand. I don't understand. So it doesn't mean that it's not right, but I just would need somebody to explain it to me in a way where I'm seeing some type of clarity on this situation and seeing the benefits, but I just don't. Maybe y'all do. Let me get back to these notes. Yeah, I think that it's interesting. I had to look that up as far as Trump wanting to deploy troops back into Afghanistan. I don't know. It says Trump has expressed interest in retaking Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan, saying that the U.S. is trying to get it back. He framed that move as part of a reasserting U.S. strategic influence in the region, particularly with the proximity to China in mind. Taliban officials have already rejected the idea, citing sovereignty and rejecting any foreign military presence. So here we go. We're back at it. We're back at it. Like who is like, who has taken over Donald Trump? This was Mr. No New Wars. This was Mr. We can work with Russia. Let's stop this war. Now you're talking about getting involved. It seems like you're being more aggressive against Russia. You want troops back in Afghanistan. You bombed Iran. It's like, what's going on? Like, who? We know what's going on. Nah, let me stop. It's not consistent to me. It's just not consistent. But let's keep going on. I don't have too much for you. Let's see. Oh, yeah. So this Qatar Air Base. So I did a little bit more digging outside of what Nick was discussing, watched a couple videos on it. I can't say that I totally understand it. One thing that I wasn't aware of is that other countries have done the same. But I believe that these other countries that have done it, they're actually NATO countries. Qatar is not in NATO, which makes it a little bit unique. Trump has been accused of doing certain things for Qatar based on financial gains. I believe that his son-in-law and the Kushners, they have close ties over there and do a lot of business. I don't know if that's why, Donald Trump's relationship is what it is with Qatar. I don't know whether this is, the United States of America's way of saying we apologize for allowing Israel to strike. Qatar, I don't know. I don't know what it is. It's one of those things that I don't know what it is. And I think Nick brings up a great point where if it was Israel and Israel was going to be training their soldiers on American soil, people would have an issue with it. So I don't understand with Qatar. I don't understand why let me say, I have an issue with it. I need more clarity. I don't understand. Why would we put ourselves in this position to where we're further entangled in this Middle Eastern region that seems to bring us nothing but chaos? Like, could you imagine if we just weren't involved in any issues with the Middle East for the last 30 to 40 years, what life would look like? If we just stayed out of our way, if we just took George Washington's advice and said, let's not meddle in foreign affairs. But to my point earlier that I was saying that there's a few other countries that have done this in America. It says that, the first one is Qatar, which was just announced in 2025. This is going to be the one at Mountain Home Air Force Base in Idaho. But then Singapore, it looks like, was the last country to do this. And it may actually still be ongoing. So it says ongoing expansion for F-35 training as of 2023. And the program actually started in 1993. That's interesting. Only obvious difference that I would point out is I don't know if a relationship with Singapore is as dangerous pertaining to the beef that it could get us involved in as Qatar. I think that's pretty obvious. But maybe I may be wrong. So maybe it's not pretty obvious. Maybe I'm just not informed. Saudi Arabia did it in 1990. It was established and it's still active as of 2025. So I'm not sure if Singapore's is still ongoing, but it said ongoing expansion for F-35 training as of 2023. I don't know if that was cut off after 2023, but it seems like Saudis, which is, just a heads up, Singapore was in Arizona at Luke Air Force Base, and Saudi Arabia, they're in Moody Air Force Base in Georgia. And their program is centered around pilot and maintenance training for Saudi officers as part of U.S.-Saudi defense agreements. So that's still ongoing. Then Japan actually began in 2018, and they are at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. I need to look that up. Joint weapons testing and F-35 pilot training. Japan purchases and trains on U.S.-made jets. So could that be more of like a business decision? Hey, we'll come out there, we'll use your product, we'll buy from you, but we need to train, on your bases. I don't know. South Korea, interesting. Active since the 1980s. I say interesting because that seems like one of those that could get us, involved in something, or at least potentially show an alignment with South Korea, which North Korea, other people could be upset with. I don't know, but could get us involved in something. And this is Shepherd Air Force Base in Texas, in which advanced flight training for ROK Air Force pilots through NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training Program. All right, so there's a few others, and I believe all of these are in NATO. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Let me see. Let me actually ask. Are these all NATO countries besides Qatar? Let's see what it says. Excellent observation, and you're right to notice that pattern. I can't say I noticed it. Somebody, whoa. Hold up. So these are not NATO. Hold on. My apologies. I was getting ready to say I can't take credit for having that observation, because that's something that I heard with I forget who was reporting on TYT, but it says Qatar is not NATO. We knew that. Singapore not a NATO member. Saudi not a NATO member. Japan not a NATO member. South Korea not a NATO member. So, all right, I'm glad that I stand corrected. I'm hoping that people didn't cut it off before I actually looked this up, and I'm glad that I actually did. Wow. All right. That's different. Let me ask ChatGPT, are you sure they are not NATO members? Let me just make sure. ChatGPT said, yes, I'm completely sure. Here's a verified breakdown with sources and context. All right, so I guess not. None of the countries hosting training programs on U.S. soil, Qatar, Singapore, Saudi Arabia, Japan, or South Korea, are NATO members. They are all U.S. allies through separate bilateral agreements or MNNA designations, which grant them similar but not identical military privileges. Okay. Would you like me to make a quick chart that explains the difference between NATO membership and major non-NATO ally status? I wrote yes. Depending on how it looks, I won't share it with y'all. I won't bore y'all with those details, but I'm a bit interested in it. So I'll save that and come back later. But let me see. Let me just read the first part. So a NATO member is a full member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a 32-nation military alliance formed in 1949 for mutual defense. And then major non-NATO ally, MNNA, is a country designated by the U.S. government as a close strategic and defense partner outside NATO. Okay. All right. So strategic partnerships, but not NATO. And I believe we could say the same thing about Qatar, especially with Donald Trump, the president. All right. Let's keep going. And one thing that Nick did point out, because even I said earlier, like, we'd be upset if Israel, was on a base, or people would have something to say if Israel was training in America, which I do agree with. But Nick did point out something, and I think he said it's apples and oranges comparing the Qatari influence to Israel's influence on America. Whether you start with the education system, entertainment industry, news outlets. We know that there's a huge Jewish influence, just to be totally honest, and a huge Israeli influence. Just is what it is. Living in America, there's just more. Just like all these politicians say, and all these politicians, all you have to do is look at who they're taking money from. The United States of America has a closer partnership with Israel, whether we think it's beneficial or not. We have a closer partnership with Israel than we have had in the past with Qatar, to my understanding. So, and just obviously want to point out, what did I write? However, now this does get us more in bed. Yeah. So this does obviously get us more in bed with Qatar. I don't know, man. It's to the point where around the world, looking at things right now, maybe it's because we're just exposed to so much more that our parents weren't exposed to, and they can't filter information as much as they previously could. And if you go back to that Smith-Mundt Act that Barack Obama signed, where propaganda to Americans is legalized, that was my takeaway from it. We don't know any of this. We just sit back and try to figure it out. And this is what creates so many of these conspiracy theories. It's the lack of trust in the government and the lack of transparency. So now we look like we're more in bed with Qatar, and it's like, well, Israel's not going to like this, right? But does this give Israel now the opportunity to do something? It's like we don't know who's really pulling the puppet strings. We don't know who's moving the pieces on the chessboard. We really don't. We really don't, because on one second it feels like it's beneficial for this group, or the country's being controlled by Israel's influence. The next second there's a Qatari base, or Qatar is going to be training their people here. So people would sit here and say, hey, how is it, being ran by Bibi Netanyahu in Israel, but they're allowing this? And then other people will then say, well, that's just a way that they can now say that, hey, we're not controlling America because look, there's a Qatari base. We don't know. We don't know. But that doesn't give us an excuse to remain ignorant. All right. We keep digging, keep uncovering, because one thing that I never want to be is in a position of ignorance by my choosing. All right. I don't want to be ignorant by my own choosing. I'm never going to know what I don't know, but there's a lot of people who are running around right now, especially y'all baby boomers, who choose not to look up stuff, who choose to simply rely on the news outlets and a lot of these lazy types of learning and educating ourselves. So let's make sure that we're doing our digging. We have access to all this stuff now more than ever. Let's take advantage of it. So on that note, as always, like, subscribe, turn your notifications on, and most importantly, please, please, please leave a comment. Let me know exactly what I may be missing. We're all biased. I have certain blind spots, but I want y'all to be very honest and open with me about them, because I just want to learn. Like I said, I don't want to be ignorant. I want to learn. I want to process new information and be able to see with as much clarity as possible. So on that note, I shall see y'all soon.
It's the black guy in the corner, but they'd rather see a on the corner. They say I'm stealing Nick's clips like I'm stealing Nick's chick, not knowing that I hit him first week for the lick. I said, Nick, I could post here while you post there. Let's run the ads up, then let's meet up over there.